Today we're going to cover chapter 15, which covers something known as this reform movement. In this 70-year block of time, it's really all about reform and improving the character of ordinary Americans. This is trying to make every single individual better, and it happens on a whole bunch of different levels. From the Second Great Awakening, that's a religious revival, looked at improving people spiritually, to all different types of reforms like public schools, women's rights, even some miracle medicines, quote-unquote miracles, because they actually had cocaine in them, to getting rid of alcohol. A lot of women saw that as the root of all evil in society. To the abolitionist movement, it's really all about changing and trying to improve society. Now, in 1850, church attendance was still a regular thing for about 75% of Americans, but the paradigm was starting to shift. People weren't so much interested in the old-time Puritan religion of the colonial days. They weren't interested in this serious rigor of religion, such as the Calvinist doctrine, where you went to church all the time, you had no fun. There's this idea of predestination. More rational ideas start to penetrate into religion. And it begins with this guy, Thomas Paine. So we talked about before how he wrote Common Sense, which helped tipped off the American Revolution. Now he writes something called The Age of Reason, and what he does in this is he argues that churches are all about monopolizing power and profit. They're a money-making machine, and they aim to put themselves on top of society. He says that churches really are just trying to enslave mankind. Well, he's pretty popular, and his ideas take off. But the ideas were already taking off with famous people like Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. They were known as deists. Although a lot of people looked at them and thought they were totally atheists, they didn't believe in any God at all, really what they relied on more than revelation from the heavens was reason. They looked at scientific fact, and they thought that took importance over the Bible. The Second Great Awakening is different from the First Great Awakening in a couple different ways. There's camp meetings where thousands of people come together and they congregate and they listen to these sermons put on by awesome speakers. So that's all the same as the First Great Awakening. But there's kind of different, more intense aspects to the Second Great Awakening. This includes speaking in tongues, jerking around, dancing, and being saved in front of the whole public audience. This idea that God really jumps into your body and captures you and saves you. Well, this is all good and great. People see this happening, and it's like the best infomercial ever, where you could actually see a product work. It's like this product of religion is working. You're watching it work right in front of your eyes. These sinners are being saved, and the problem is that they soon return to their old ways. After these revival meetings, they go back into society. They're drunks. They swear. They do all the same things that they did before they came to these camp meetings. But it at least looks good, so more people get involved with the church, and we start to see church membership go through the roof. The two religions that win the most in this are the Methodists and the Baptists. They're both stressing personal conversion, so it's not anything like the Calvinist ideas of past, where there's predestination. Each person earns their own trip to heaven. In both these religions, there's more democratic control of the church. There's no vestry that really has control. It's no small group of people in power, but it's the congregation as a whole. And this appeals to the people who are interested in this idea of mass democracy, and this idea starts to spread as people are empowered. And because of this, more people take efforts in humanitarian ideas and starting to save other aspects of society. So a lot of historians would argue that this reform movement really all starts with the Second Great Awakening. Now, it makes a lot of sense that the Second Great Awakening helped kick off widespread reform efforts and humanitarian efforts in different aspects of America. It's because religion has a lot of moral teachings in it. And one of the things that one of the most famous preachers of the Second Great Awakening takes a stance against is alcohol and slavery. So he's looking towards making society and the body kind of this perfect being. So he speaks out about these two things. Now, Charles Finney, he is a former lawyer, but not so much success. He's more successful as a preacher, as a public speaker. Particularly, he's famous for this thing called the anxious bench, where if you have sins to confess, you come in front of the whole congregation, you sit down in front of this bench, maybe in front of hundreds of thousands of people, and you repent. And so everyone's eyes on the congregation are in front of you. So this is the idea, oh, like anxious bench. Everyone's watching you as you kind of confess your sins. So that's revolutionary, also along with his ideas that women could pray in public. So now we're starting to change the status quo where men are up here in this hierarchy and women are down here. We're starting to close in on this disparity and get women more equal rights. And it's starting with the Second Great Awakening. Here this is a mass democratic movement. So here's an example, and this is a picture taken from your book on pages 321, I believe, of a revivalist meeting. So here you have this kind of encampment. There's tents back here where people would spend the night. Literally, people flocked by the thousands to hear these fire and brimstone preachers give their sermon. So you would have a whole crowd in convulsions, being possessed with this great higher order God. And they'd be speaking in tongues and languages that they've never spoken before or learned, kind of this true belief that some higher being has been struck within them. All in the name of being saved, of being converted, and now embracing this God that you previously didn't embrace. And this was thought to have led to salvation. Not predestination, but your conversion, and that God has accepted you. One of the most significant impacts of the Second Great Awakening is its impact on religion. Middle-class women, in fact, were the most active of the people in the revivalist meetings. They were the majority of the new members in the Methodist and the Baptist Church, and they were the most likely to actually stay involved in religion after everyone left these revival camp meetings and went back to their old ways. Religion gave women the chance to participate in society. If there was something that their family was doing wrong, they looked at religion and the moral teachings it had to try to fix that and bring their family back to God. And while all this is happening, there's really the transformation of the family, and women see this as a microcosm of society. If we could use religion, if it's focused on changing the family and making the individual good, whole, and godly, we do that with the rest of society. So they start to look forward to things like slavery, like their right to vote, like alcohol abuse, and they start things like the temperance society, the abolition movement, and it all roots from the Second Great Awakening. Now there's this area called the Burned Over District in western New York. You may refer to it as upstate New York. It's kind of right along the border of Lake Ontario. This is an area where so many early Puritan people went. It was such a hotbed of religion. There were so many people, preachers that would come through screaming about, do this or you're going to hell. You will be damned if you don't act like this. So it's called the Burned Over District because there's so many people preaching about hell and damnation that it just catches on this nickname of Burned Over District. It's also such a hotbed for new religions that we see probably 6 to 12 different distinct little pockets of religion. New churches like the Millerites and the
Adventists pop up. They may not exactly be churches, but they're kind of religious movements that catch a following. Some people may call them cults, but the Millerites don't last too long. Why? Because they interpreted the Bible to mean that Christ would return 10/22/1844. That obviously didn't happen. So they lose a little bit of steam, but they stick around, believe it or not. And here you could see a map of the Burned Over District that kind of kick-started the Second Great Awakening. Looks as though this color is a little bit off right here. Burned Over District, that color would kind of imply that this whole map is the Burned Over District. It should be kind of more along this shade. You see the Burned Over District right up here. And all these arrows kind of coming out of Utica, Syracuse, all along Lake Ontario, upstate western New York. You see the revivalist movement start. Spread south and spread west. And you could use this key on this map to see in the Burned Over District the sampling of new religious movements that are out there. One of the most notable religions that pops up out of the Second Great Awakening is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormon religion. It started with a man named Joseph Smith, who said that angels came to him and gave him golden plates. Now, these golden plates, once transcribed, made up the Book of Mormon, which is still around today.
in its original form as transcribed from these golden plates. This is important because it's a new and purely American religion. There's no European influence. It didn't come over from across the Atlantic Ocean. It was formed in America. The Mormon religion preached cooperativeness and collective group action as more important than the individual. Now, this didn't go over too well with the rest of the nation, particularly Ohio, Missouri, and Illinois, which were very close by, because you started to see Mormons voting together. They'd all take the same stance on an issue, and they started to get a lot of power at the polls. And a lot of groups did not take kindly to this. Other people feared the fact that they seemed to embrace polygamy, which is the idea that you can marry multiple people. And in 1844, Joseph Smith is actually murdered. So another person comes in, Brigham Young, who only has formal schooling for 11 days, but he's an aggressive leader, he's a great preacher, and he kind of rallies all the Mormons together, and he guides them to the Promised Land. So they take a trek all the way to Utah, Salt Lake City, and that's kind of their main hub of activity. They set up shop. Although it was kind of a barren desert wasteland at the time, they set up irrigation and they're able to flourish and be very successful. And because of that, there's still a high concentration of Mormons in Utah and Salt Lake City specifically to this day. And here you can see some of the violence that was taken against them. In fact, the federal government would not even recognize statehood of Utah until I think 1869 because of the Mormon threat, specifically the Mormon threat of polygamy, that this is throwing off the American way of life. But here you can check out the map, the trek that the Mormons took from the burned over district in upstate New York, right along Lake Ontario, all the way in their covered wagons to Salt Lake City, Utah. Okay, so it's a pretty long trek. Now, because the upper class wouldn't want to shift the status quo even in the form of religion, what we see is they pretty much stay stagnant through the Second Great Awakening. The wealthier class, they remain as Episcopalians, Presbyterians, Congregationalists, Unitarians, kind of these older religions that have been around for a while. But new hope is offered by the Methodist and Baptist religions, especially because they are more democratic. So we start to see the lower classes get more involved in these, the less educated from the South and the West. They're really catching on.